It started in the year 1878, the land already tired of bleeding. A dry wind rolled over the Arizona territory, dragging with it the silence that comes after too many names have been buried in unmarked ground. The mesquite trees stood like gaunt sentinels, their limbs stripped bare. Vultures circled high over scrub land, but no one looked up anymore. There was nothing left to pray for, only debts to settle. Nantan rode alone, a weathered rifle across his lap and the memory of smoke in his lungs. His horse moved like it knew the way, hooves brushing dust over old blood. He didn't speak, not even to the spirits. His mouth was set hard, and the lines around his eyes told more than any war song. He'd been given a task by the council: ride to the Caldwell homestead and erase what was left of that name. He hadn't asked questions. The Caldwell patriarch had led white men into an Apache camp during a false truce, offered tobacco and meat, then fired when the children came out. 26 were killed. No one punished the men. Nantan had stood in the ashes afterward, holding the still warm hand of a boy who'd once shared his fire. The smell of burning pine and charred flesh had followed him since. Now, 5 winters later, the council said it was time. He crossed the last ridge as the sun died on the horizon, throwing copper light across the valley. Smoke from a cooking fire trailed into the sky, thin, low, and lonely. He moved closer on foot, rifle ready, boots brushing through brittle grass. The house was smaller than he expected. Half the roof patched with rusted tin, the fence broken in places. A garden fought for life under a crooked willow, but it was mostly weeds and stubborn roots. There were no guards, no men on horseback. Just a woman in a faded blue dress, sleeves rolled, hauling a pail of water from a pump that coughed more air than water. Her back was bent with the weight of years, not age. Her face was turned from him, jaw tight, like she was chewing the silence. A girl, no older than 17, moved behind her with a basket of cracked eggs. Another, younger, maybe 10, sat on the porch, pale and still, legs wrapped in a wool blanket. She didn't move when the others did. Her eyes were open, unfocused, like her mind was somewhere behind her skin. Nantan lowered his rifle. He stayed in the shadows of the trees until night. They ate quietly inside, cornbread, by the smell of it, and beans. The older girl sang under her breath while sweeping near the window. The widow mended something by lamplight. The sick girl didn't speak. The man he'd come for wasn't here. By midnight the wind had picked up again, rattling the loose tin on the roof. Nantan sat against a cold stone and watched their windows go dark, one by one. A coyote called out once in the distance. No reply. He didn't sleep. The next morning, he didn't leave. Miriam Caldwell, he knew her name from the list, struggled with the firewood, splitting logs with a dull axe. She didn't curse when the blade stuck. She just pressed her foot against the stump and leaned in harder. The girl, Emma, worked beside her with a quiet diligence, eyes always scanning the tree line like she could feel him out there. The younger one, Clara, hadn't come outside. The sun rose, passed, and fell again. Still he watched. On the third night the storm came. Clouds thick as smoke rolled in from the east, dragging thunder behind them. Rain broke over the ridge fast and sudden, knocking dust into mud. Nantan moved closer, staying low. The youngest girl stumbled from the porch, barefoot, chasing a runaway chicken. She collapsed in the dirt before she could call out. Miriam ran, skirt soaked, trying to lift her. Her hands shook. The girl was burning hot, her breath short and fast. Nantan stepped out of the trees, no rifle, no words. In one hand, a leather pouch of dried willow bark and creosote. In the other, a wrapped gourd of cool spring water. The widow turned, pistol drawn from her apron. The hammer clicked back, but her arms shook more than the storm. He didn't flinch. Rain matted his hair to his face, dripping from the edge of his jaw. Emma moved between them, voice low. He could have done worse by now, Ma. Miriam didn't lower the gun. But she didn't fire either. He set the pouch down in the mud, and stepped back into the dark, vanishing like part of the storm. They didn't call for him. But they didn't stop watching the trees either. He returned just before dawn. The door was ajar, lantern light flickering behind it. The girl still lay fevered on the floor beside the stove, sweat pouring from her face. The herbs sat untouched. Nantan stepped through the doorway without waiting. Emma stood ready, a knife in her hand, but her grip wasn't firm. Miriam watched him kneel beside Clara. His hands moved with the kind of gentleness that doesn't need to be explained. He crushed the bark, mixed it with warm water, held it to the child's lips. Her body resisted, then took it in. No one spoke. By sunrise, the fever broke. And when the fire burned low and Clara finally slept without shivering, Miriam handed Nantan a blanket without looking at him. He took it, stepped outside, and lay down beneath the porch eaves. Not to rest, but to stay. The chicken coop was empty, the hens long gone or eaten. Emma stared at it like she might will one back into existence, then turned away with a sigh that didn't quite make it out of her chest. Her dress was dust-streaked, hem-frayed, and she walked with a limp that hadn't been there before the last winter. She hauled the water bucket like it owed her something, her hand blistered and red from the old rope handle. Miriam wiped sweat from her brow and went back to digging the dead roots from the garden bed. The shovel sank an inch before stopping with a clunk. She didn't curse. She never did. Just set her jaw, leaned on the handle, and tried again. The house creaked behind them. The wind carried the smell of old canvas, dry wood, and something sharp, like rust or memory. Nantan watched without moving. His eyes, dark and quiet, followed every small motion, Emma glancing toward the hills, Miriam coughing into her sleeve, Clara laying still on the porch under the wool blanket. 3 people who didn't speak unless they had to. 3 people who were meant to be gone. He should have ridden away. Instead, he stayed beneath the juniper, unseen but not untouched. Something about the way the girl pulled the blanket tighter when the wind picked up. The way Miriam's hands worked the shovel with more desperation than hope. The way the elder daughter didn't cry, even when the pump spit sand into the water bucket and left her with nothing. He didn't belong in this place, not anymore. Not in the world of hand-stitched dresses and tin-roof homes, of cracked mirrors and girls too young to be this old. But still he stayed. Clara's coughing started up again. Sharp barking. The kind that came from the bones, not the throat. Miriam dropped the shovel and rushed to the porch, lifting the girl into her arms. Emma came quick, setting the bucket down so hard the water sloshed out over her boots. She knelt beside them, pressing a damp cloth to her sister's forehead. "Still hot," she murmured. "Too hot." Miriam brushed the girl's hair back and looked toward the sun, already halfway down the sky. "We're out of the good route." Emma didn't answer. They both knew there wasn't anything left to try. From the trees, Nantan pulled the pouch from his belt, tight-stitched leather with crushed bark and yellow-tipped root. He walked forward before he could talk himself out of it, slow but sure. His steps made no sound. The moment his shadow crossed the porch, Miriam stood, rifle raised. Her fingers trembled at the trigger, but her eyes stayed fixed. Emma moved again, but slower this time. Not toward him. Not away either. He held out the pouch, arm extended. Not a word spoken. Not a twitch in his face. Emma's voice was quiet. "It's what he gave her before." Miriam's aim didn't waver. "You bring this sickness?" He shook his head once. No anger. No answer beyond that. Clara coughed again, dry now, and Miriam's eyes flicked down. When she looked back up, the barrel lowered half an inch. Her breath caught in her throat, just for a second. Then, she nodded toward the open door. Inside. Nantan followed, ducking his head as he stepped into the cabin. The smell of old smoke and lavender hung in the air. The hearth still held heat. He knelt beside the girl, untying the pouch. Emma handed him a pot of lukewarm water without being asked. He mixed, stirred, tested the heat on the inside of his wrist. Then he tilted the girl's head gently, pressing the mixture to her lips. She swallowed once, then again. Her breathing slowed, shallow but steady. Miriam set the rifle down beside the door. Her arms crossed, but not in anger, more like she was holding something back that might spill if she let go. "You got a name?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. Just turned toward the window, watching how the light broke through a cracked pane. Natan. She nodded. That means something? He glanced at her, then the floor. Spokesman. You don't talk much for one. No. Silence returned, thick but not hostile. The girl's breathing evened out. Emma sat by the fire, watching Nan with something between caution and curiosity. Her fingers traced the worn threads of the hem of her skirt. Clara stirred in her sleep, then coughed again, just once. Softer now. Miriam brought over a damp cloth and handed it to him. He took it, wiped the girl's brow. The gesture wasn't gentle. It was practiced. Familiar. Emma shifted, her voice quieter now. Did you have a little one? His hand paused. Just for a moment. Then he nodded. Once. Miriam didn't ask more. She sat across the room, hands clasped together between her knees, watching him the way a hawk watches wind, calculating but tired. The sun dropped low. Shadows stretched across the floorboards. No one spoke. When it grew dark enough to need a lantern, Emma stood and lit one without asking. She set it near the hearth, not too close. Natan rose, moved toward the door. You're leaving? Miriam asked. He didn't answer. Just stepped outside. A moment later, the door creaked open again. Emma stood with a blanket in her hands. You'll freeze out there. He took it. Nodded. She didn't smile. Just said, She's sleeping better. Thank you. Natan looked back toward the window, where the flickering lamplight danced behind the curtain. Then up toward the sky. The stars had started to show. He laid down under the eaves, blanket over his chest, rifle across his knees. He didn't plan to stay. But he didn't plan to leave either. The morning air held the bite of leftover night. Natan stirred before the sun rose, dusting the chill from his blanket and brushing silence off his skin like ash. Inside the cabin, the woman moved first. Her steps were soft, deliberate, like someone who'd learned that every creak of wood might wake something fragile. He stood, folded the blanket, and left it neatly by the door. Not as a gesture, just habit. Miriam was outside by the time he reached the garden. She looked at him, didn't speak. He took the rusted hoe leaning against the fence, dropped into the dry soil without a word. She didn't stop him. Later, she brought him water in a chipped tin cup, set it on the post near his elbow, and went back to pulling weeds. Emma watched from the porch, a book on her knees unread. Clara slept longer than usual. Her breathing, for once, was calm. That evening, Natan fixed the broken pump. He stripped it down, cleaned the grit from its mouth, used leather strips from his own gear to patch the seal. When water finally came, Emma clapped once before catching herself and folding her hands in her lap. Miriam brought out a loaf of hard bread and 3 tin bowls. She sat across from him as he ate. She didn't offer thanks, but she passed him a second helping when he finished the first. Where'd you learn to fix that? She asked. He sipped from his cup. Before the war, I listened. To who? He didn't answer. Later, Clara came outside wrapped in a blanket, feet dragging through the dust. She sat beside him on the step, not saying anything, just watching the fireflies blinking in the grass. Do you sing? She asked, voice rough from days of coughing. He shook his head. My papa sang, she said. But only when he drank. Miriam looked up at that but didn't interrupt. Emma glanced at her mother, then back at the fire. Clara turned to Natan again. Did you have a horse when you were little? I did. What was its name? He paused. Didn't have one. We didn't name animals. They already knew who they were. Clara nodded like that made perfect sense. Then she leaned against his arm and fell asleep without asking. The next morning, Natan was still there. Miriam handed him a cracked mug of coffee. He took it, sipped, nodded. You've done this before, she said. He looked at her. Been part of a place. Fixed things. Tended. His eyes went to the horizon. I was a father. She didn't ask more. They worked side by side again. The fence got a new line of wire, pulled tight with strips of hide. Emma milked the old goat, muttering to it like an old friend. Clara followed behind Nantan, dragging a stick in the dirt, drawing odd shapes he didn't recognize. When the sun dipped low and the wind picked up, Emma set out dinner. This time, there were 4 bowls. They ate in silence. Not because there was nothing to say, because there was too much. Afterward, inside by the fire, Miriam pulled a worn bundle from beneath the floorboards. A leather case. She opened it carefully, revealing a folded piece of fabric, military. Union blue. This was his, she said. Before he came out here. Nantan didn't move. Just watched the flicker of the fire against her hands. He came back different. Meaner. Like something followed him home and never left. Emma shifted. He wasn't always bad. No, Miriam agreed. But he died that way. Clara whispered. He made you cry. Miriam looked at her but didn't deny it. Nantan stared at the fire. He led the raid at Red Creek. Emma blinked. Miriam set the fabric down slowly. I didn't know, she said. I did, Nantan replied. He reached into his coat and pulled something small, flat, wooden, smoothed by time. A child's toy, carved and burned at the edges. It was my son's, he said. He died there. Clara's hand found his without hesitation. Emma leaned forward, voice low. Is that why you came? Nantan didn't speak. He didn't have to. The fire cracked once. Miriam stood, took the fabric back to the floorboards, buried it beneath the planks. No one else will, she said, voice firm. Later that night, after the girls were asleep, Miriam stepped onto the porch where Nantan sat sharpening his blade. The moon was thin above them, wind pulling soft through the trees. You stay, she said. I was waiting. For what? He looked at her, tired. To hate you. She didn't flinch. Just leaned on the post beside him, arms folded. Do you? He returned to his blade. No. She watched him for a while, then asked, You still plan to leave? He didn't answer. When she went back inside, she didn't shut the door all the way. Nantan sat with his blade, unmoving, until the first coyote howled somewhere down the ridge. And still he stayed. The rider came at sundown, dust curling behind him like smoke off a funeral pyre. He didn't stop at the gate, didn't wave. Just paused on the ridge long enough to look down at the homestead, then turned and rode back the way he came. Emma spotted him first. She didn't say anything at dinner, just pushed food around her plate, and glanced out the window more than she ate. Clara was quiet too, rubbing at her scarred lip and humming under her breath. Nantan ate like always, slow, steady, mindful. Miriam didn't ask what they were all thinking. Not yet. The next morning, Nantan saddled the old bay horse he'd fixed up from a neighbor's abandoned corral. He strapped the rifle to the saddle and checked the weight of his knife without comment. Miriam stood on the porch, arms crossed. Her voice was calm, but the set of her jaw said otherwise. You expect trouble. I expect a knock, he said. And boots behind it. They won't ask questions. I wouldn't. Clara ran out then, barefoot, hair in knots. She hugged his leg before he could step away. Don't go, she whispered. He didn't answer. Just set a hand on her head and looked at the horizon. That evening, the wind changed. It came in low and heavy, like it knew what was coming. The chickens didn't roost right, and the goat banged its head against the fence post until Emma tied it off. Miriam checked the rifle by the door 3 times. She didn't mention it. Nantan stood out near the edge of the field, back to the house, eyes watching the dark line of the trees. It was past midnight when they came, 4 riders, moving quiet but not cautious. Soldiers, by their coats. Not regulars. Scouts, probably. They dismounted at the edge of the clearing, moved toward the house and practiced silence. One peeled off, circled toward the back. Miriam saw them first through the slit in the curtains. She didn't call out. She just picked up the rifle and moved to the front door. Emma held Clara close, one hand pressed to the girl's mouth. Nantan didn't wait for them to knock. He stepped outside. The first shot cracked before a word was spoken. It caught him in the side, just above the hip, and dropped him hard. Dust kicked up around him. The soldiers moved in, fast, too fast for talk. Miriam fired from the doorway, the shot taking one in the throat. He folded like wet linen. Emma dragged Clara to the back room, shoved her under the bed. Outside, Nandan pulled his knife and lunged at the one nearest him, driving it up beneath the ribs before the man could scream. Another turned his gun, hesitated just long enough to die. Miriam's second shot took him between the eyes. The last man ran. Nandan started to chase but staggered, blood trailing from his side like spilled ink. He dropped to one knee, breathing hard. Miriam was beside him a moment later, pressing cloth to the wound, her face pale with fury and fear. "You were supposed to leave," she said. "I was supposed to kill you," he replied, voice dry. Emma came out, rifle in hand. Her arms shook, but her grip was firm. She looked at the blood on the dirt, the bodies by the fence. Then she looked at Nandan. "Is he dead?" Nandan nodded. "Won't be the last. We have to go," Miriam said. "The wagon? Packed already?" He looked at her then, really looked. "You were ready?" "No," she said. "Just not foolish." By first light, the smoke had drawn a hawk overhead. They buried the dead behind the barn without markers. Nandan leaned on Miriam as they walked to the wagon, his breath shallow, pain painted across his face like war paint. Clara rode in back, clutching a quilt and a worn-out doll. Emma drove, eyes fixed forward. They left the homestead behind without looking back. The house didn't burn on its own. Miriam lit the fire herself. She didn't watch it catch. They rode west, past the old stage road and into land no one claimed. Nandan lay across the back of the wagon, bleeding into cloth that used to be the table linen. Miriam sat beside him, sewing a line across his side with a hand that didn't tremble once. "Why'd you come back in?" she asked. He didn't speak. "You could have let them take it. Let them burn it. You owed us nothing." He coughed, pain making his answer short. "I stayed." "Why?" He closed his eyes. "Because you didn't shoot me. That's more than I could say for most." Clara leaned over the wagon rail. "You're not gonna die, right?" "Not tonight." Emma didn't turn around. Her voice was quiet, steady. "Good. Because I'd hate to bury the only one of us who's earned his place." The road behind them grew narrower. The tracks of the wagon wheels faded in the wind. There was no destination yet. Just distance. And it was enough, for now. The desert didn't care who bled into it. The sun rose slow over the canyon rim, casting long shadows across the wagon tracks already half filled with dust. Emma's hands were raw on the reins. The horse pulled steady, hoofs crunching over bone-dry gravel. Miriam sat beside her, lips cracked, eyes half closed but watching everything. Behind them, Nandan groaned low under the canvas tarp, fever burning through him like wildfire through brush. Clara sang soft to herself, face pressed into her doll's torn cotton hair. The sound wasn't sweet. It was the sound of someone trying not to be scared. They didn't stop until the sun had climbed high enough to punish them. Miriam found a patch of scrub shade near a dried creek and helped Emma lower Nandan down. His face was slick with sweat, breathing shallow. The stitches had held, but barely. Blood crusted dark along his side. He blinked up at the sky, lips parted, but said nothing. Emma fetched water from the canteen. There wasn't much. She didn't drink. Miriam knelt beside Nandan, peeled back the cloth with slow, deliberate fingers. The wound was angry, swollen, but not leaking anymore. "He's holding," she murmured, not sure if it was to Emma, herself, or him. Clara knelt at his head, stroking his hair like he was a sick animal. "You're not going to die," she said, as if the weight of her words could root him to this world. He blinked once, the barest nod. They stayed there until late afternoon, when the light softened just enough to let them breathe. Then they rode again. No direction but west. No goal but away. The mission came into view near dusk, half buried in red stone, the bell tower broken, cross long gone. An old adobe husk left behind by men with good intentions and poor timing. The wagon creaked into the broken yard. Dust settled. Miriam climbed down first. She tested the beams, stepped through the old door, listened to the silence. No birds. No voices. Just stone and sun. "It'll hold," she said. Emma didn't argue. They made a bed for Nantan in the corner beneath what was once the altar. Miriam soaked a cloth in cool water and laid it over his head. She didn't hum, didn't whisper prayers. Just worked. When night came, the wind howled through the archways, and the girls huddled together. Emma tried to light a fire, but the wood was too green, the matches near gone. Miriam stood at the entrance, rifle across her arms, eyes on the horizon. He woke near midnight coughing. Miriam was there with a cup, steady hands. She lifted his head, helped him drink. "I thought you'd be gone by now," he rasped. "We buried that thought," she said. Clara stirred, looked over, smiled in her sleep. Nantan coughed again. "I should have left sooner." "You should have," she agreed. "But then we'd be dead." He tried to sit. Failed. Miriam pressed a hand to his chest. "You're not strong yet." He looked at her. "You still afraid of me?" She didn't answer. Just adjusted the cloth over his side. "I used to think fear and hate were the same thing." "They're not." Emma came to the doorway then, wrapped in her father's coat. She stared at the horizon. "There's no road out here," she said. "Just dirt and silence." "That's enough," Miriam replied. "For now." They stayed at the mission. Days passed, marked only by sunrise and the steady return of color to Nantan's face. He carved small things from scrap wood, birds, a horse, a snake that Clara named but wouldn't share the name of. Emma worked on the roof with old nails and more stubbornness than skill. Miriam grew quiet again, but her silence felt different now, less like defense, more like breath. Nantan walked on the third day. Just to the far wall and back, but it was enough. Miriam watched him go with her arms folded. Said nothing. On the seventh day, they heard gunfire in the distance. Just one shot. Then nothing. No one panicked. They just sat a little closer to the walls that night. Clara curled between Emma and Nantan, her small hand finding his. "Will they come?" she whispered. "They might," he said. "Will you stop them?" He didn't promise. Just touched her head and closed his eyes. Miriam stood near the old altar, rifle in hand. She didn't speak. Didn't sleep. In the morning, the world was the same. And they were still together. The chicken laid its first egg in weeks. Emma found it nestled in straw near the cracked wall of the mission, still warm. She held it like it was gold, turning it over in her palm, then slipped it into her apron and walked back to the garden plot, where weeds still fought harder than the seeds ever did. Miriam knelt in the dirt, sleeves rolled to her elbows, fingers black with soil. The sun had yet to climb past the broken bell tower, and already her hair stuck to her neck with sweat. She didn't speak when Emma passed the egg to her. Just nodded and set it gently in a wooden bowl beside 3 small potatoes and a crooked carrot. That was dinner. Behind the mission, Nantan walked the perimeter, a limp in his step that hadn't healed right but didn't slow him anymore. He carried a stick in place of a rifle, tapping it now and then against the dry ground as if listening for something underneath. Clara followed a few paces behind, dragging a doll by one arm, humming a tune with no words. Her braids bounced when she ran to catch up. "Watch your steps," Nantan said. "Why?" "Because the land remembers." Clara squinted at the dirt. "It looks the same as yesterday. Doesn't mean it forgot." She nodded like that made perfect sense. They circled back to the front, where Emma had taken a break in the shade, whittling slivers from a piece of wood with her father's old pocket knife. She looked up when they approached. "It'll storm tonight," she said. "Sky says no," Nantan replied. "I don't trust the sky." Miriam came around the corner with a bucket half filled from the old cistern. "Sky doesn't care what we trust." Nantan reached for the bucket. She let him take it, and their hands touched for the barest moment. He didn't flinch this time. They ate supper in silence. No prayers, no stories. Just the scrape of spoons and the clink of tin cups. Afterward, Clara wandered into the chapel space, sat on a stone and looked up at the ceiling. Part of it was gone now, open to the sky. "Think God still lives here?" she asked. Emma leaned in the doorway, arms crossed. "If he does, he's quiet." Nantan sat outside sharpening his blade, slow and methodical. Not out of fear. Just routine. He hadn't used it since the night they left the homestead. But he kept it clean. Miriam joined him, not asking, not waiting for permission. They sat in the growing dark, listening to the night bugs and distant wind. She looked toward the ridgeline. "You ever think about leaving?" "I've been leaving since I was 10. She nodded. "I mean leaving here," she said. "Going back to your people." "I don't have people," he said. "Not anymore. They'd take you back. They'd see a man who spared the blood they asked for. Who took in a settler woman and her children." He shook his head. "That man's already dead to them." She didn't argue. Emma appeared in the doorway, holding the blanket Clara had kicked off. "She's asleep." Miriam stood, took the blanket, and disappeared into the dark. Emma sat beside Nantan, picked up the whetstone, and ran at once along the blade's edge. It made a clean, hard sound. "You still think about revenge?" she asked. He took the knife back from her hands. "No." "Why not?" He looked toward the chapel, where candlelight flickered faintly behind the shutters. "Because there's nothing left to avenge." She didn't say anything more. Just stared at the dirt until the wind picked up and carried the night colder than it had any right to be. The next morning, Nantan rose before dawn, walked to the hill beyond the mission. The horizon stretched wide and empty, painted in soft oranges and pale grays. He sat with his legs crossed, knife in hand, rifle left behind. The silence felt different now, less like a warning, more like a promise. Below, Miriam tended the fire, boiling water in the same dented pot they brought from the homestead. Emma fed the goat. Clara ran barefoot in the dust, laughing. He pulled the knife from its sheath, turned it once in the light, then dug a shallow hole with the blade. When it was deep enough, he laid the weapon in and covered it with both hands, pressing down until the dirt was smooth. Clara found him a while later. She didn't speak, just sat beside him and drew a shape in the dirt with her finger, a bird with wide wings. "You buried it?" she asked. "Yes." "Are you still a warrior?" He looked at her, thoughtful. "I think I'm something else now." She smiled. "Good." The sun climbed higher, warming the back of his neck. Voices called faintly from below. He stood, dusted off his hands, and offered one to the girl. They walked back together, steps quiet, slow, but certain. The mission wasn't much. The walls leaned. The roof sagged. But inside it, life moved forward. Not fast. Not loud. But forward. And for the first time in years, Nantan didn't feel like he was waiting to disappear.